much to talk about. I mean, what we've been seeing in the political climate right now has been fascinating because it's so different. There have been a lot of changes going on in our country, over to a virtual campaigning and so many different facets happening when it comes to the political dynamics. And the beat goes on with the campaign trail. So what are we to make of some of these things? How are they playing out? What about Bernie Sanders endorsing Joe Biden? Is that something that should be shocking us? Let's talk about it with Cassie Smedile, who is Deputy Communications Director for the Republican National Committee, and she joins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Cassie, hello, welcome, and thank you.
Hello, great to be with you.
Great to have you here. So, I mentioned Bernie endorsing Biden. Can we play that clip, Nathan? I want to play that. We'll just start there because this is something I know it absolutely shocked you that socialist Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden. But let's take a listen last night on Joe's live stream.
So today I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe, and I'm speaking just for myself now, is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
Are you shocked at this endorsement, Cassie?
Well, if I'm a Bernie supporter, I'm a little upset, I guess. But also, the most shocking thing about that endorsement, quote, conversation is that Joe Biden read it from a teleprompter. So that just goes to show you about the authenticity of the Biden campaign and maybe even the authenticity of that endorsement. But, for conservatives and for Republicans, this isn't, let's breathe a huge sigh of relief. Bernie's not in the race. It's just this moderate Joe Biden. That's not true. They are the same side of a radical coin. And Joe Biden has adopted nearly every policy position of Bernie Sanders. Yesterday's endorsement conversation was Bernie Sanders basically giving Joe Biden a litmus test. Will you do this? Will you do that? So make no mistake, today's Democrat Party, and at the helm of that party is Joe Biden, is a radical leftist party that has no interest in giving the American people, empowering them to live our lives as we see fit. It is a government controls all at the taxpayer's expense. That's what today's Democrat Party wants to do with our lives. And Joe Biden is just the latest spokesman for that, even if he is reading it off of a teleprompter.
Well, and you can tell pretty clearly how he's trying to play for Bernie's vote and Bernie's supporters' votes, because he said just over the weekend, putting forward a radical plan when it comes to student loan debt forgiveness and what have you. Okay, he's not saying let's forgive all of it, but he's working his way there. It's certainly in a way that's, it seems to me, pretty akin at the minimum to what Elizabeth Warren was putting forward. So what do you make of him adopting views on higher education and also on Medicare expansion? Not quite to Medicare for all, but he's backpedaling, it seems, on his so-called moderate view on Medicare for all. And some of these other stances.
Right. Normally when someone becomes their party's presumptive nominee, you run to the left or to the right in the primary, and then you come back to the middle for the general. Joe Biden's showing no signs of that. In fact, he's running further to the left, you could say. And that should give every person who has ever thought of him as a moderate pause. What is the real Joe Biden? Which is the real Joe Biden? The guy over the last 40 years who has positioned himself as a pragmatist and a moderate? Or the guy that we're seeing at the top of the Democrats' ticket this time around, who has happily adopted the far left brand of socialism that is the norm in today's Democrat Party? Which is the real Joe Biden? Would the real Joe Biden please stand up? And I think that's a real problem for all American voters, because we know that we want a fighter, but we also want authentic fighter for us. And that's Donald Trump. And so what we're seeing is that not only is Joe Biden struggling to get the support of the Bernie Sanders revolutionists, but he's struggling to get the support of hardworking middle America Democrats, lifelong Democrats from areas like where I come from in the Midwest, who are saying, I don't like this guy, I don't think he's the right guy for the job. But conversely, what I hear from Donald Trump is this is someone who's talking about the issues that are at the center of my life. And I'm going to go check him out, whether they were going to his rallies or now we're seeing just in the last month, we've had 275,000 new volunteers join our movement. And many of them are first-time voters or crossover voters who were once considered themselves Democrats.
Cassie Smedile, again, our guest Deputy Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. One of the dynamics that I have noted for probably a year and a half now at least has been that the Democratic Party right now is not so much a battle of moderates versus progressives, but more this idea of incrementalists. Maybe they look at the last 100 years and the growth of government and the success Democrats have had in many areas in growing government over time, and they want to continue with this idea of slow and steady wins the race versus the instant changers. This is more the Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez wing of the party. That is, we want this change now. We don't want slow and steady. That's not a moderate versus progressive or socialist sort of idea. It's just more of a difference of tactics and approach as opposed to on policy. And I think we're starting to see Biden go more and more in that direction of the instant changers as opposed to, and giving into that side as opposed to, really just taking a leftward jolt.
Man, it's an excellent distinction because that's right. Our whole lives we've said, I know that they are more radical than they are letting on because I see how they campaign and then I see how they practice, whether it's in Congress or in state houses across the country. And it's been this little, backroom secret of the Democrat Party that they were much more radical than many and most Americans thought. And now it's like the curtain has been pulled back on Oz, and you see just how radical they are. They've become unapologetic. I mean, just think about it. A month or so ago, the Illinois primary, they lost the last pro-life Democrat in Congress. And that's a direct result of people like Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, and other leading Democrats saying that there is no room in today's Democrat Party for a pro-life Democrat. That's a real change that they are publicly admitting that without caution in today's Democrat Party. And look at any of the other positions they've taken. They used to be the blue collar party, or at least that's what they touted. There's nothing blue collar about today's Democrat Party that wants to do away with hardworking American-made jobs like coal and fracking and manufacturing. That's put us in a really serious predicament over the years that the Democrat Party has yielded so much of our great industry overseas. So it's a real problem for Democrats as Americans are waking up to seeing that they are just a radical left party who now no longer feels that they even need to put on a mask and make you think they're moderate. They feel no need to do that, and that should be very concerning for all Americans.
I want to get to the media in just a moment because we had quite a spectacle yesterday at the president's press conference with the media, but I noticed here that the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee in the first quarter of the year brought in more than $212 million. Now, admittedly, 2 of the 3 months of the quarter, you didn't really have these shutdowns starting, but that's still a pretty sizable sum, especially given that the RNC and the Trump campaign have been raising money out the wazoo, I would say.
Yes, and that's a direct result of all of these people, the momentum of our movement. And yes, we're grateful that when times were really good in our economy and our country before everything was turned upside down, we had just seen month after month of record-breaking fundraising. But frankly, while it has slowed down, it has not changed. We continue to see and post strong months even as we've turned all virtual. And that's as a direct result to our great, not only small dollar donors, but new small dollar donors. As I mentioned earlier, we've had 275,000 new people join our movement since we turned into a work from home virtual campaign. And these are people who, for the first time in their lives, many of them, are seeing what is happening in our country when you have a media that is complicit with the Democrat Party in wanting to have a government controls all system. And for so many of us who spend our days going to work and picking up kids and figuring out, what's for dinner, we're not often glued to our TVs like we are right now. And when you see the president coming into our homes 7 days a week in many weeks, and he's speaking candidly and in full context without it just being sound bites taken out of context by CNN and others, you see the American people see that they've got a fighter in this president. They've got a president who every day is out there working to figure out how we get through this and come out better on the other side. And it just runs counter to the narrative that Democrats and the media have been trying to shape for the past 3+ years. So I think that's another reason why we are seeing increased interest in our movement, and people, whether they're donating or making calls. I offer all of your listeners and viewers go to TrumpVictory.com if you want to get signed up for our Trump Talk, and you can make calls from wherever you're socially distancing anytime you'd like. And we see millions of calls happening just in the past month from people who are inspired and motivated to make sure that we have this president for 4 more years.
I want to shift gears here with our guest, Cassie Smedile, from the Republican National Committee to the media. Yesterday was quite interesting. So there was, and I don't have enough time. I pulled a full 4.5-minute clip of President Trump playing some snippets from the media yesterday that he shared yesterday at his press conference, showcasing different instances where the media had said one thing that maybe was downplaying coronavirus earlier on. You also saw governors giving him some praise and credit. But right after that, you had MSNBC, and I think CNN might have too, a cutaway. I want to play cut 9. This is Ari Melber on MSNBC right after President Trump went ahead and played those montages and talked a little bit about it himself.
We are cutting into what was not a White House coronavirus task force briefing. I am Ari Melber. Our special coverage continues. We are going to avoid airing any more of this White House briefing until it returns to what it was supposed to be, which was the coronavirus task force providing medical information. What we just saw, I want to be very clear with viewers, was a video the White House put out which suggests they are spending their precious time right now making videos that defend the president's record and tenure rather than provide the much-needed emergency medical information that was promised at these daily briefings.
A few-part question for you, Cassie. One, what did you make of them cutting in? Number 2, what did you make of President Trump doing that in the first place at this press conference? And number 3, do you think that it is the media's place to determine what a press conference from the president's supposed to be like when he's putting forward these press conferences? So like what he does or not, he's the guy who's putting them on.
Right. Imagine what this would all look like if the media just resolved to just report facts A, facts B's, and show the coverage without context or bias, or in context without their bias. But I would also note the president's clips that he pulled out were, what Ari Melber did there is proving the president's point, that every day he gets up there and they give these answers that are just very studied, and he's using this team of highly capable individuals to pull together this response for our country. And then the media spends the entire time of that press briefing figuring out how they're going to play gotcha with them, as opposed to trying to figure out what's what and what's the best information that we need to be getting to the American public. And so all those clips were the president saying, I stopped flights from China, and he was doing that as the media was out there still downplaying this virus, or that he said, I called it the Wuhan virus or the China COVID-19 to illustrate where it came from, and the media came after him about that, only to find out that weeks earlier they had been repeatedly calling it the same. So again, to these American people who normally aren't glued to their TVs all day long like we are now, it's an opportunity to see in bright, shiny lights exactly what the president has been claiming for the last 4 years that the media has been doing to him. And I think once they saw that they were stuck watching this and that their viewers accidentally were going to see this, their only option was to cut away because, of course, they can't, like I said, have the big curtain of Oz revealed on them.
Let's show here cut 4. This is Paula Reed of CBS and what she had to do in her exchange with the president, particularly over his travel ban. It was quite something.
Every Democrat thought I made a mistake when I did it. I saved tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives by putting it.
That you bought, the argument is that you bought yourself some time. You didn't use it to prepare hospitals. You didn't use it to ramp up testing. Right now,
you're so disgraceful. It's so disgraceful the way you said it. Let me just listen. I just went over it.
To make people
I just went over
in
it.
an unprecedented crisis.
I think we've got enough of a sense for that particular exchange over this travel ban that the president moved forward with months ago. What did you make of that, and particularly the media's Q&A on some of those issues? Now, I have to say, I do think that the pushback some of the media gave to his line about total authority was legitimate, and I don't think we were talking with a guest of the Heritage Foundation in the last segment that his comment about the president and his total authority really is in step with how he's actually been operating as president of the United States in terms of federalism and acknowledging the role of the states and so forth. But there was so much going on there as far as the media just trying to go after the president in these little ways, which is an interesting point to observe when you see how they criticize the president for playing the media montage early on in his press conference. But your thoughts, Cassie?
Right, and if you are bored enough to go and check out that particular reporter's Twitter feed, you would notice that it's full of her self-congratulatory notes, less about reporting the news. So you can imply there what maybe her point of her tirade yesterday might have been, which is what we find from so many of these reporters that are just looking for their moment as opposed to their opportunity to get straight news out to the American people. And I think that's what's so frustrating to so many Americans, and why you've seen poll after poll, the media's credibility is just absolutely plummeting, even as the president's credibility and how he and his team have handled the crisis continues to hold its steady highs. Because on the one hand, you see a president and his team who come out every single day with updates, with new information, with we fast-tracked this, we've cut through the red tape on that, we're trying to get you access to as many tests and options as possible. And then you have the media every day saying, how can I play gotcha with this president today? 2+ hours nearly every single day that we get with the president of the United States, and the media thinks it's their opportunity to get their moment in the sun and to get some Twitter followers. It's really disgraceful. And I think it's, again, why you see the American people turning elsewhere to get their news, because they just see it for the show that it has become, as opposed to an opportunity to get the information we so desperately need.
And finally, here's an example to really put a pin on your point, Cassie Smedile, our guest deputy communications director at the Republican National Committee. This is cut two. After Dr. Fauci clarified about a question or answer he gave to a hypothetical question on Sunday, he was pressed by the same Paula Reed as to whether or not he was basically put up to this.
Interview, you said there was pushback.
Yeah.
Where did that pushback come from?
No, it wasn't, and that was the wrong choice of words. You know what it was? When people discuss, not necessarily in front of the president, when people discuss, they say, well, you know, this is going to have maybe a harmful effect on this or on that. So it was a poor choice of words. There wasn't anybody saying, no, you shouldn't do that.
Are you doing this voluntarily, or did
No,
the president?
I'm doing it. Everything I do is voluntarily. Please, don't even imply that.
I mean, I was just stunned seeing Dr. Fauci, who, by the way, the media just absolutely adores, and understandably so in a lot of ways, but to see them actually say, someone, Paula Reed, actually say that to Dr. Fauci, are you being put up to this? Are you doing this voluntarily? That was something else.
Oh, and his response was just great. Please, please, the very Brooklyn in him. But if you think about Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, people who have been mitigating crises around the world for the better part of the last 3 decades at least, and now I can imagine the relationship that they might have had with the press 20, 30 years ago as you're working on the AIDS pandemic versus now. You can even see, I think, even how they have turned to maybe say, you know, Mr. President, I now understand what you've been talking about these 3+ years. This is crazy. These aren't real, thoughtful, honest, direct questions. These are people who are trying to get their next TV deal. And that's unfortunate for the American people who, as they've said time and again, we need these answers. This is an unprecedented time. This is a very serious time in our country. Whether you're talking about people's health or people's economic well-being, we need these officials to be speaking with us directly every single day if we can get it. And just to have a media that's running counter to that, whereas you feel like now, you know, for this being a typically kind of polarizing time, as people like to say in our country, you've just seen incredible acts of American patriotism and the American spirit on display, whether it's local businesses completely converting their businesses to get PPE, or whether it's working through the red tape so that we can get testing out to more people. And every single day, everybody coming together to figure out how we can fix these issues. And we're all on the same team. And it's this whole of America approach that you hear discussed a lot, except but for these few in the media and these few in the Democrat Party who are using it for their opportunity to score points. And it's very unfortunate, but I do think people see through it. And I think the vast majority of us much prefer to be part of the world, part of the solution, and part of the country that's trying to do our best to get through this together, and not part of the
Sure.
country or community that just wants to make a mountain out of a molehill every day.
Well, when I see the way in which the media has diminished its own credibility like this, when there are legitimate questions of pushback against the president, that like yesterday when I saw some of the pushback on the total authority comment. That gets diminished when you're actually asking a decent, fair question. That gets diminished by your own credibility issues when you're building up your own this idea that you are fighting against the power, but at the same time the public doesn't trust you anymore. And then when you're asking something legitimate, then people can't take it at face value because you have diminished your credibility so much, which I think is an important point. Cassie Smedile with the Republican National Committee. Great to check in with you today. Thanks so much for taking the time. All right, once again, Cassie Smedile joining us from the Republican National Committee.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you. You as well.